Hey everyone, I want to introduce you, as if she needs an introduction, to a dear friend of mine, a psychologist and expert on narcissism and narcissistic abuse, Dr. Ramani. She is known by so many as the world leading expert on YouTube. She teaches us not only how to recover from narcissists, but how to avoid these kinds of relationships in our future. So many of us end up in toxic or abusive relationships that are so difficult to get out of, and what this woman does is not just life-changing, but life-saving in helping people to untangle themselves from these difficult relationships, not just in their love lives, but in every part of their lives, whether it's a parent, a sibling, a friend, or a co-worker or boss. This is a powerful conversation for any of you who have been affected by these relationships in your childhood or in your adult life. Maybe you married one, maybe you stayed with one for a very long time, and it's had a tremendous impact on your self-esteem, your identity, what you think you're capable of. Watch this episode because I think it is one of the most powerful episodes we have ever done. Me and Dr. Ramani talk about her new book, It's Not You. Grab a copy while you're at it. It is a powerful book. It's the consolidation of years and years and years of her work, and I know this is going to help so many people. So grab a copy of It's Not You and then sit down and watch this interview. I present to you one of my dear friends and one of the people I respect the most out there, Dr. Ramani. Hey friend.
Hello there.
It's so nice to speak with you these days because it's so easy.
Oh, I know. Like, we feel like we're basically filming a conversation that we would have had. So this is easy.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And I mean, I don't have words for the amount of support you've had. I think that this is a process where it can be demoralizing. It certainly brings up my anxiety. It brings up all my old wounds of not being enough too, which has been fascinating to it's sort of like meta book at that point because like I'm in it, but the book is what's causing all those feelings. So I can't thank you, everyone in your team for their unending support. Yes, unending support. So thank you, but it's terrible. It's terrible.
I can relate. I can relate. It's one of the things I love about you is that you just have, there's no part of you that is trying to be perfect for your audience or trying to, create an image of having it all figured out for yourself at all times. And, you saying that is just more of that. And I think it's one of the reasons people love you and find you so relatable. One of the moments I really appreciated in your book was when you were vulnerable about someone emailing you that was in some way, either making light or kind of devaluing the work that you do and what it brought up for you. And I know, like, I was in a situation recently where someone that was an old school friend, actually, really got under my skin. It's not even someone that I actually spend any time with anymore, but it's someone that, like, we ended up having to cross paths over something over an event. And at this event, they immediately made me feel bad again because it was just immediately negative and pulling me down and saying negative things. It's almost like they couldn't help themselves. It's just like straight into how can I dig you? And it really sent me into a little funk because it made me feel like a teenager again.
Correct, and I think that the psychology of that is interesting because I now, we're so circumspect. We could absolutely, to within a millimeter, analyze the why someone would do these things, right? They're insecure, they feel competitive, they themselves are not happy with where they're at. That's all good and well. But that kind of interpretive kind of take on it usually comes afterwards. I mean, this is where so much of what happens to folks in these narcissistic relationships, we feel it somatically first. We get taken back to being a teenager, to the 6-year-old, to that developmental stage when some of this was all sort of set. And there's a certain exhaustion that happens to us, like, that sort of not feeling good, not feeling safe, once again feeling not enough. That's why all kidding aside, that's why this book promotion process is so hard for me because there's things I feel confident. Someone's asked me to write something, give me the time. I'll write it, and I'll write it beautifully. I feel confident in that skill set. To sell it, forget it. It is absolutely not my skill set. And so I think that when we go out of the things we know, we really feel that sense of those old wounds come up, right? Because when we think about it, that's often where we got the most wounded. We didn't feel good about something. Some people will say school is always that place of invalidation for them. And so anytime even something feels like school, it brings up a lot of anxiety. It could be a person. And while, like I said, we can give these elegant and very clear interpretive explanations of the why of people afterwards, when it's happening, it takes us down. And sometimes we get exhausted, we don't even know why. Like, why do I feel so tired after this event? Or it's and there's a lot of restraint too. I mean, I think that the thing you're talking about in the book I had written was that how I'd shared, I had held back. Basically the win, that interaction that I wrote about, that I held back in terms of sharing, in terms of getting into it. And if you can get to the other side of that, not taking the bait, not falling into it, you do feel great, like I didn't do that to myself. Because it's really caring for yourself when you don't give it up, right? And say, I'll tell you what I'm doing, and then they go right in there and make their dig. You don't give them that part, because if someone's like, hey, what's going on, what's new? Not much, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. They're not often going to go for you. But even in that, in that particular case where the person was making light of it, that getting to a more authentic place with it, knowing it's important, it can help, but it still stings.
What do you say to people who feel like they must be in some way, they're almost disappointed in themselves, that after everything they've done in their life, after everything they've achieved, all the work they've done, that something can still get under their skin in that way, something can still affect them in that way, and it can make us feel like, God, if something like that can still get to me, then I must have made no progress, or I must just be broken, or there must be something just wrong with me that's beyond repair. What do you say to people who really are frustrated that they don't feel like they've made more progress in their lives about what hurts them?
Right, and I think that, knowing one of the greatest progresses that a person can make is they become aware of why the thing is hurting them, right? They become very connected to that vulnerable space within them. I don't know that there's always a version of this where that goes away. I think we can become protective and caregiving of that part of us that gets affected. So it's not so much that this will never bother me again. It's, I understand why this bothers me. I understand how I held this. Again, I say we hold it somatically, especially these things that make us feel small or young, or again, take us back to these core wounds. We do carry it there. And as far as our nervous system is concerned, we're getting a message of there's a threat. You're not safe. You might lose connection. You might lose love. You might lose attachment. You better believe our bodies are going to respond to that. So when you might think like some little dig from some random person, it's nothing to do with attachment, it kind of does. Because the body's funny in how it holds things that resemble the original wound, right? And so when we recognize for a moment why we try to overcompensate the way we do in many ways, like for me, I've had to do a lot of soul searching and why it's so important for me, for this book to do well. And, there's layers of it. It's funny, the cover of the book is layers, and there's a reason for that. Because the layers of it are that you have to dig in, like, all of us are motivated by ego, Matthew. There's nobody who's ego-free. And anyone who says I'm free of ego, I'm like, you are either taking ecstasy or out of your mind. Because all of us have ego. We need ego. Ego is the endoskeleton. Ego is why we're not a mass of smush on the ground. It's what leads to advocacy. It's why we sometimes put our own needs first. It's why we don't give away everything we've got. Like, we have to have some ego. And when there's too much ego, well, that's what I write about. But we don't have it. And I think it's about being in check about what core wounds are being addressed. So when I even thought, like, I really want this book to do well, and there's practical reasons, because it could mean, I think to me, it's this topic will be taken more seriously. I think people who go through narcissistic relationships still face a lot of like, well, this isn't a thing, and like, we've got to make this a thing kind of thing. So people will get trained in this and get help for it and not be doubted about it. And people who went through trauma years ago would face the same kind of doubt. right? So I want that to happen, but I also, and I want the word to get out, I want it to help my parents, but I think there was a little girl in me who felt very unseen, who felt very unvalued, who desperately wanted someone to notice her, but was also scared of being noticed. And the combination of those things, like if I get seen, then I can fail, and then people will make fun of me or will be disappointed in me. But if I don't succeed, then I won't be loved. So it starts to become, all of a sudden I'm like, all I'm trying to do is get on someone's podcast, and I'm going through some sort of psychoanalytic hell. And so that's and it's being honest with ourselves. So when it doesn't happen, I have to recognize there's a primal part of myself that feels like I'm the little girl who didn't win the spelling bee.
Wow. So many people, when they're out there in their love lives, and not just in their love lives, in all their relationships, find themselves drawn to people or situations that end up hurting them. And it can take us many years before we ever realize that A, there's a pattern, and that B, that pattern in some way relates to our history. It's not just this kind of genetic thing that we are predisposed to keep being attracted to certain kinds of people. But there's actually something in our history that has precipitated this. And you said something really interesting, which is when you can understand why these things, in the case that we were talking about, when someone says something and it gets under our skin, why that hurts us, that there's something liberating even just in having the compassion that comes from knowing that this didn't come from nowhere, that this connects to something.
Or I'm not too sensitive, because that's the other thing we think is like, I'm just too sensitive, I'm being ridiculous, when in fact there's nothing ridiculous. Again, bring it back to the sort of orienting system within you that's trying to keep you safe. And so this felt like, again, it's hitting a primal sort of a wound.
And when we know that connecting the dots in that way can actually be a recipe for self-compassion. But a lot of people aren't necessarily connecting their dating choices to those old wounds because they've never really explored them, or maybe they even have an image of their past that doesn't suggest those wounds, or they don't look at it and go, oh, that comes from there. They have a story about their past that is, I don't even really have a right to be this insecure or to keep chasing these bad people because I was loved, or I was in a situation where things were going well, or whatever, my parents were good to me. Can you help us just understand more about, people who search for any kind of advice online in their love lives will at some point come across the term trauma bond? Could you speak to what the trauma bond is for people who are just starting to learn about it now, and how it might be impacting them, and where those things come from, so that maybe people can have even as they're listening to us now, a mini excavation of their past that might start to illuminate some of the ways they are today?
Yeah, so the term trauma bonding is one that's, again, psychological narcissism. It's often used incorrectly, right? But understanding it can be really quite empowering. So trauma bonding, the experience of trauma bonding is this perception, this experience, this sense that you have an unbreakable or difficult to disrupt bond with someone that's created by a relationship that is chronically alternating between good and bad. There's the experience that if you pedal faster, you'll earn that other person's love. And they sometimes do show up at that moment. And when they do, it feels like a cold room becomes warm all of a sudden. And you feel whole and good, but then they pull back again. And so life becomes this sort of quest to maintain those good moments. And there. It's not like it's all bad moments. Trauma-bonded relationships can look a little different in childhood and adulthood. In childhood, it really becomes a sort of a laying down of sort of pathways in the brain and the body, in the sense that the primary caregivers, usually parents, are people who might be variably available. And in some cases, they're acutely abusive, right? But then there's still good moments. And in other cases, they're simply not available. They're checked out for any number of reasons. This is why it's tricky when you have one narcissistic parent and one not narcissistic parent, because the not narcissistic parent is suffering. And it's not that they're not a loving parent, but they can't always be present. And so that can also leave the child in the sense of, how do I also take care of that parent who's suffering and win them over and stay in good stead with the sort of the more problematic, more, I would say abusive is probably a stronger word, but like, yeah, problematic, in and out parent, right? So that back and forth, the alternation between good and bad is how we create this trauma bond. The good creates a fire, right? Like it's there, and I can get to that. So when the bad happens, the tendency is to self-blame. Well, it's not going well because it's me, because there were good moments, so it's got to be me. By internalizing the explanation into ourselves, it's adaptive. Because if it's us, then there's something we can fix. If it's the other person, that's in trouble. And we can't maintain the status quo and the social connection that for a child is a survival need. And for an adult, physiologically, is experienced as a survival need, though they could break up and find someone new. When you talk to trauma bonded people, they will say the idea of ending this relationship is literally giving me a sense of panic. I can't breathe, my heart is racing, and they said, yet intellectually I can sit here and tell you 25 things that are wrong with this relationship. That disconnect is classically part of the trauma bond. So people in trauma bonded relationships experience a lot of cognitive dissonance, that tension that comes when things are not consistent. The best way to take away that inconsistency, the best way to get rid of that consistency and make that dissonance go away, because we don't like being tense like that, is to justify. They're having a bad day. They don't mean it. You know, we had a good time last weekend. Of course my parent was. My parent took me fishing, whatever it may be. The excuses get created. And some of it is just simply, you tell yourself what you need to tell yourself so you look like everyone else, that your life looks like everyone else. But the justifications, the self-blame, you keep having the same arguments, you keep having the same, like, you ruminate in the same circle, maybe it's this, then that, and next time I'm going to say it differently, but the argument's always the same, right? It's always, the conflict is there, and it keeps going around in the same merry-go-round. It doesn't get resolved, is my point. In a healthy relationship, conflict happens, but the conflict hits a point of resolution. It doesn't here. And I've always said sort of my trauma bond hack, that at least I tell therapists, but I think it matters here, is when I've worked with clients who I believe might be trauma bonded or even in the early trauma bonded phases, and they're in a relationship that's very unhealthy. And then I'm talking now an intimate relationship in adulthood. I'll say, tell me what you love about this person. And they'll say, well, it's hard to put it into words. Like, I don't know, like it's like a connection. Like, that's not the answer. I'm looking for, I feel safe with this person. I love spending time with this person. I look forward to seeing them. I feel seen in their presence. I love watching them excel. Like, those are the answers I'm looking for, okay? When you give me this, I don't know, that's a trauma bonding answer. And yet, they can't step away from it. When it's a person who's sort of trauma bonded to a parent, you'll often get very duty, loyalty, and obligation kinds of answers. You know, sort of, well, they had a tough go of it, and, you know, our family kind of sticks together, and we, you know, so there's a sense of maybe loyalty maybe to the larger construct of the family, or other people in the family system. So but what I will never hear about is, tell me what you like about your parent. They can't come up with anything. But they'll say, well, like, we're this really close-knit family, and you know, my parents had a rough go of it, and I'll be hearing the whole damn genetic history of the family, but I'm thinking, tell me what you like about your parents. And the question's so uncomfortable that people pull away from it. That's often a sign of a trauma bond. When a person feels that they can't pull away, or they can't say, like, no, my father, mother, whatever, is a terrible person. I keep interacting because I value my sisters or my cousins or whomever it may be. So these are the things we look for in a trauma bonded relationship. And so there's almost always what we call a repetition compulsion. A person's almost trying to work the same thing out over and over and over again. There's this constant sense of tension and dissonance. There's often a lot of betrayal. And I'd say by definition, narcissistic relationships are betrayal-related relationships. I think anytime a person doesn't show up and show up in the roles and responsibilities we have when we're in a close relationship, that's a betrayal. I think saying a betrayal is only someone cheating on you, or lying to you, or taking your money. Those are betrayals too. But I think it's a betrayal when the other person isn't holding up their side of the relationship, honestly, right? So when we are betrayed in our close relationships, there's an adaptive value to not seeing it. Because if we see it, then we feel compelled to engage in a call. It's like a call to action. Gotta do something about it now. This person's so unhealthy. So the natural tendency is to just sort of cordon it off. And when it gets cordoned off, we start feeling sick, but we stay in the relationship. That's something else when you see the trauma bonded relationship. There's nothing but cognitive awareness. The person will say, I know this is unhealthy. I know they're treating me badly. I know it. I can't explain why I can't leave. That is the mantra of everyone in the trauma bonded relationship. So it's almost like you have this, and it's where it gets interesting as we look at work on polyvagal response, right? As long as that left brain's online and things are, the person feels safe, they're like, yeah, this is what's wrong, and they might even get closer to a call to action. But there are times, for example, if a person someone's trauma bonded with uses things like withholding and withdrawing as part of their relationship behavior, and the trauma bonded person has a history with abandonment, right? That pulling back is enough to throw that trauma bonded person into that polyvagal response. Now that right brain is firing, and it's all emotion, right? So that logical ability, that sort of frontal lobe ability to say, yeah, no, this is so unhealthy, and I could spend another 10 years in it, that goes out the window. So what we need to do is bring people back into their body, regulate their nervous system so they can see this more clearly what's happening. But that takes a minute. It takes a minute. But until then, people are in these relationships that are unhealthy, they can articulate they're unhealthy, and they cannot figure out why they can't see a way out. And this, Matt, is also above and beyond practical factors. Practical factors can make trauma bonding tricky because people will always use those as a justification. We've got young kids, it's expensive to live here, I don't have a job, this is looked down on my culture. Those are all very valid reasons, and I understand why people don't leave. But a person you can un-trauma bond yourself and still remain in a relationship, if that makes sense. So you can say, I see this clearly, I can't get up and leave this, or I'm not calling this person fully out of my life right now because it's going to upend an entire other system, workplace, family, whatever. But I see this clearly. I see what's in front of me. So I'm not going to trust this person in the same way. I'm not going to engage with this person in the same way. That's what I mean. You can become un-trauma bonded, but still physically have contact with it. That's a very long answer.
No, I have so many jump off points from that. Because when people feel that emotional response to it, that emotional response itself, especially in attraction for a lot of people, they use it as a signal for attraction, right? I must be I'm feeling a lot, and so that must lend itself to the importance of this person or the relationship, or that feels like passion to me.
It does. To a lot of people, that backing and forthing, the good and the bad, the breaking up and making up, that very much does feel like passion. They view it as we're alive, we have these hot tempers, we're fiery tempered, that kind of thing. There will be this sort of narrative that's constructed around it.
Yes.
I have live.
And even
You have what?
Live.
a number of people that I've
What
heard
is
live? YouTube.
that
Oh,
Just streaming live.
is
they
anyone
are
watching?
hung up on
No.
the person that they maybe
But
dated
Mom,
in the last 2
Bob
years.
gave us the oranges.
That
Yeah, I hear everything. Thank you, Jade.
Mom, we should make him
Right.
something with the
And once I
oranges.
start
Okay.
looking at
Or
these
we should make him
messages,
something. Oh, you
they'll
found them?
send me the texts and they'll show
No,
me. And
it's other. Иди,
in
доченька,
their
I'm
mind,
busy.
there's this whole history worth talking about with this person. And if you were to look at these messages, you would say, there's almost nothing here.
Mom, go live on TikTok.
There is an enormous story. We've spent the last 2 hours talking about, like, you've chosen these 2 hours to focus on this situation with the time that we have together. And yet, it's actually it's almost, when you look at it from a distance, you go, I can't believe we're dedicating this much time to this person who definitely isn't thinking about you right now, and definitely is like, this may have been a blip on his radar, but for you it has become this central story of the last year, and you know, why didn't he call back, or what happened there when he initially showed interest on the date and then he pulled away? And it gets chopped up and dissected so much. What would your advice be to people in these situations where they are, what is happening with people where they are getting so hung up on these situations that actually on the surface there's so little going on?
I think that number one, think of this from the point of view of narratives and meaning making, right? We human beings have this capacity to take bits and pieces and turn it into a coherent narrative about something, even when there's not a lot to work with, or what feels coherent to us, I should say. It's not actually maybe coherent, is the right word, turn it into a narrative, right? So this, like you said, they were in a relationship for 2 years and almost nothing happened, right? Or for a year or 6 months, and really nothing happened. But the way it's being talked about, you would have thought that this was a fully robust relationship, right? But then the next sort of layer down on that is, this is very possibly what this person had to do as a child. Create this very rich, robust fantasy world as a parent that was engaged, that was interesting, that was really involved with them. I remember someone I talked to whose parent had gone on a business trip or something. The parent was very, very disengaged and actually quite dismissive. But the parent remembered to get the child a small gift on the trip. And that child, it was almost like a museum piece in their room. They cherished it. They would only sparingly interact with it. They didn't want anything to happen to it. They loved this object. And so there was a whole story about, look how important I am, it got me this, and they would talk about the object. There's many objects that come into their life, like, look at my dad got me this bank, and I'm going to save all this money, and he was in Denver, and he got me this, and like, he was thinking about him as a whole thing, like, you would have thought the dad thought about the kid the whole time in Denver, probably saw it in the airport, and quickly grabbed it and brought it to the child, and the child has turned it into nothing short of a relic, right? So, and if that child also had that same parent who would withhold or withdraw, you can all of a sudden see how, if you have the capacity to turn a piggy bank from an airport into the greatest thing that has ever happened, how easy it is to take a few text messages and turn that into a relationship. So that's another piece. But the next level then becomes the one thing, and this is where you and I sort of have a lot of shared resonance in our work. I think I come at it from a different angle. You talk about it in terms of standards. I talk about it in terms of acceptability, which is this sense of, is this behavior acceptable to you? If anyone else in the world you reached out to, I said, what if you're in the same room and you talked to someone and they just sat there, stone silent, and didn't respond to you? You would not find this to be strange? And they'll say, blah, 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 electronic. I said, no, it's communication. You explain to me how this is this acceptable? And and to me, this is one of the cores of this whole narcissistic piece, because everyone is trying to come up a billion excuses for why narcissistic people are the way they are. I said, and most of these excuses, frankly, are valid. At the end of the day, there's only one thing. I said, this behavior is not acceptable. I do not care what's under this iceberg. All I know is that this behavior is not acceptable, and the more time you spend in space of unacceptable behavior, the sicker you're going to get. That's the only thing I know here. The backstory is not going to protect you. So those are the sorts of 3 ways I would think about that if I was working with a client on something like that.
Yeah, the more you spend time around it, the more normal it becomes to you. And I think that's where people really lose their way, because they no longer are tethered to another reality. And you spend all your time justifying it, and you end up becoming part of this strange little world that has no bearing on what a healthy relationship is, but you don't necessarily have any memories anymore of what a healthy relationship is. Like, what can people do to orient themselves towards healthier relationships when A, they may not know what one looks like, and B, they still find themselves attracted to the old thing? It's like the new thing that they need to be going for is invisible.
Right.
They don't even know what they're shooting for, or not compelling, and the old thing feels very visible because it's on their radar, and to their nervous system at least, it seems compelling.
Well, yeah, and then this is where sometimes and it depends on how we interpret this. It's interesting, that which is interpreted as unsafe by one person is interpreted as compelling by another. That's why some people are willing to skateboard down a steep road, and I'm like, well, that just looks like a hip injury to me, so I'm not gonna do it. They get a different pleasure out of it. We're talking about this idea of narratives, right? So I wanna come back to that, because I just read something very interesting the other day. I talked about it actually in a seminar we did this past week, and it might have some bearing here. This was old, actually, I think it was an article I read when I was in graduate school, and I needed it as a reference. I'm like, I'm gonna go old school on this, I'm gonna pull this piece out again. And it was even more stunning now than when I read it in grad school, because it was, one thing they were talking, was a tiny little corner of the article. But they were talking about the capacity, if somebody has the capacity to create a coherent narrative, and you and I have talked about this socially, we're not just, we're not on camera, but this, just in terms of how narratives get constructed. But if somebody has the capacity to create a coherent narrative about what has happened to them, by coherent, I mean like based in reality, not fantasy, not my father thinks about me all the time, look, I have a piggy bank kind of thing, right? But a coherent narrative, whomever it's about, those are people who have a lot better, not only probably healing, but definitely discernment. Because the capacity to have the coherent narrative is the truth of the situation. In this particular article, they were talking about women who are now mothers who had abusive mothers. And the women who were able to create coherent narratives that really captured the truth of what happened to them as children were almost completely unlikely to harm their own children. Because that's always the fear, right? If you have a terrible parent, you're going to be bad with your own kids. But that ability to say, like, no, this is what happened to me, that is enough to actually, in a way, holding that inner working model. Like, you now know what you're not going to do because you see it clearly in your life. You're not in denial about that. You have not sort of tried to make it nicer and make it more palatable, because that's when it sneaks up on you and it bites you, right? So to this point of how do we get people to think differently about this, the hardest thing of all is to create that coherent narrative, because it's painful. And it means you have to see all the players for what they are. And it means that you have to acknowledge you might have come from a really, really damaging, harmful place where you were not kept safe. And in some ways, it sometimes even means seeing the parent you thought had your back kind of fully didn't have your back. It's not an indictment of that parent, but it's like, whoa. A lot of people will create this sort of, this parent's a savior, this parent's a devil, or this parent's a savior and this parent works hard. And then they're like, that's not so much what it is. And then when we get into adult relationships, people might even say, well, we were just in different places. No, this was psychologically unsafe. Your sympathetic nervous system looked like the 4th of July. This is not just two people in different places. So it's really being forced to look at that and then be able to have that be very manifest and clear. Yeah, sure, interpretations may vary, but something happened. And so that's one piece of this. The second piece is growth only happens when we're uncomfortable. And the uncomfortability here is to be with a person where you're not feeling this churn all the time. A lot of people have no schema for what safety feels like, none whatsoever. They don't know what it is. When you think of what trauma does, a traumatized person lives life in hypervigilance, constantly looking for, combing the environment for threats. Because after being through trauma, all your nervous system wants is to keep you safe, right? So there's not that sense of what safety, that fully parasympathetic, relaxed state, which we can create through things like meditation and mindfulness and sleep and better nutrition and grounding and just sort of loving our bodies a bit more. That these poor bodies try to love it. They love us so much, but we don't do right by them all the time. And so all of these things is to even see what safety feels like, because for many people, the absence of safety in a relationship almost doesn't feel, it's unknown. And so it's then having that, like talking that through. And I've had clients say, like, I kind of had to white knuckle the boring relationship, right? And I'm like, can we use it? And I've even used that word boring. I realize it's a different word. I mean, how about we say the non-activated relationship, right? Where you can show up as your real self, where you can make mistakes and not worry about rejection. But then you're not having to earn someone's love. If you're not earning someone's love, well, what the hell is that? So that's where this gets to be helping people understand the transactions that they were in. That without earning, it's almost like if somebody just said, hey, you woke up, here's a little bit of money. Not enough to make a difference. That doesn't actually really feel very good. You want there to be some, most of us want to, we feel like we have to earn. Well, that shouldn't be the case in relationships, right? There has to be the sense of, I exist and I feel okay with this person. I feel safe, I feel seen, I feel heard, but I don't feel chaotic. And for most people, love equals chaos. I hate to say it, really for most people. And movies don't help. They all sell the same message that chaos is life.
It's so, it really is, and Audrey and I talk about this all the time, and one of Audrey's favorite phrases since the beginning of our relationship was always just, people will be happier if they chase the right things, and we'll always reliably be unhappy if we chase the wrong things. And she always said, you know, you could chase the wrong things for a while, but you'll always end up having to circle back again and chase the right things in order to be happy. But it does feel so alien at first to be chasing the right things, and it can feel strange and even boring. And what do you tell people about whether, when they don't know if what they're going after right now is just unexciting or unappealing because it's what they're not used to and they need to learn to acclimatize to it, or whether it's that way because it's genuinely not a stimulating relationship for them?
It's funny you ask this question, because I have to say, sort of answer it in that, like a sort of a aspirational way. A lot of the work I do with the few clients I now work with is on discernment, right? Because after you've been through a narcissistic relationship, you don't want to go to that part of it again. So it's all about discernment. And I am struck about how well people are able to do this. They said, we just never had a roadmap. We never had a rule book. We didn't even, you're saying you chase the wrong thing. People don't know the right thing or the wrong thing looks like. I mean, they just don't know. And in fact, maybe even take away the chase, like when it comes to relationships, it's a big need. But they said, for most of them, they're overcorrecting a little bit on the discernment. As soon as they see anything that feels abrupt or dismissive, or doesn't feel safe within them, they are saying, yeah, no. And so I think, like I said, they're throwing back fish that they could have kept. But better they err that way, because they are saying, like, I felt sort of not seen in that comment, and they're saying these are things I never would have dreamed of saying about another human being before. They never thought they had the right? So here's how I'm going to put it to you, all right, because I think that this is probably more relatable and more tangible. I have seen people go into a grocery store and fuss in an aisle. I don't know, I don't know if there's, you do that for 10-15 minutes. They're discerning more between 2 cans of soup than they often will about a person. And they will do that about, is the banana organic? Is the soup this? Is the hotel that? Is the car this? Is the refrigerator that? So we know how to discern. We just aren't willing to bring that analysis to people, right? And even with the refrigerator, right? I recently bought a refrigerator because my other one broke. And everyone's like, you gotta get the one with the drawer in the bottom. You gotta get the one with the drawer in the bottom. That's how this is the state of the art. I'm like, I don't like the drawer in the bottom because this stuff always sinks and I can't get the ice cream I want, can't get the thing I want, and it goes to the bottom and it melts and it goes bad. I'm angry at the drawer. No, it's the drawer in the bottom. I said, no, I understand. I hear all the arguments. I like the one on the side. That was, as silly as that sounds, I was going against a tide because I know my frozen food consumption habits. And I needed the freezer on the side. Zero regret, Matt. And I know, it's not cheap, like a refrigerator is not cheap, right? But as silly as it sounds, in that process, I knocked myself out. I researched everything about all the pros. want to buy your fridge, I'm your girl, because I can tell you anything about how to pick your fridge. So but the idea of honoring myself and saying, I understand that this kind of fridge is considered the modern way, and I don't need such, I know, like, but what if you have platters? I'm like, I'm an introvert. I don't want platters, because that means people are coming to my house, and I don't want anybody in my house. So let's just take that piece right out. And so it was a moment where I chose what felt right to me. Whereas in the past, Matt, I would have bought that one with the drawer at the bottom, because I thought everyone in the world is telling me this one's right. I would have gone against what was in my best interest. I think we can sometimes get there a little bit easier on objects, cars, refrigerators, the hotel you're going to stay at. But there is a certain amount of knowing ourselves. Like a person might think, like, I don't want to stay in some tall, fancy hotel. I'd rather stay in a small hotel. No, it doesn't have the amenities. Listen to yourself. That can actually start elevating and escalating to people. So if you can start with small discernment experiments in your life and say, what feels righter to me? To hell with all the guides and the ratings and the stars, what feels righter to me? And and make the decision and commit to it. That becomes a brick building towards, that refrigerator thing worked out real well. And that hotel thing worked out real well. And that sweater I got, that's what I wanted to get, I'm glad I didn't. Because I can see now how that wouldn't have worked. We pay attention to these little discernments we do. And then we start to see that when I listen to myself, these decisions are going a lot better. And so there's that piece that you're talking about, but what if my body is saying, I want this, I think that this could work for me, like this feels better in myself. Number one, most people don't know what a healthy relationship is. If I gave everyone a test and said, list out what a healthy relationship is, I think you get a little bit of love, compassion, forgiveness sort of stuff, but I don't think you'd get the respect, the growth orientation, the patience, the collaborative sacrifice piece. I don't think you'd get to those higher order, and I don't think you get to safety. Most people don't use that word because to them safety means someone's not punching, right? And so I think number one, people need to know what constitutes a healthy relationship. Number two, people have to be able to dig in to where they really came from. What was a template they were given for marriage? What is a template they were given for love? What is a template they were given for attachment, for closeness? For many people, that was a very fraught script. And so dig into that and pay attention to that. And then start to see, how did you get love as a kid? What kind of machinations did you have to put yourself through? Because those machinations are likely what makes someone exciting to come.
One of the things I loved in the book was the kind of whole section that you had on changing patterns. And it was a sort of highly practical section where you talked about various things that people can do to start changing patterns. One of them was be mindful of them and what your patterns are. And I even loved actually the practical side of like doing a slowing down, because when you get that nervous system response to something, if you're not getting a text back, or if someone has done something that's kind of sent you into that fight or flight, you talk about doing an activity deliberately, even if it's emptying the dishwasher or folding laundry. It's just anything that could almost slow things down in that moment. I really related to that because my anxiety always wants to speed things up. And anytime, for me, it's like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a thing that forces presence for an hour, and I can't be anywhere else when I do it. And whatever it is that's troubling me, there's a state that I come to it. An hour later, there's a state that I come to that thing with that's different because I feel more present and grounded, and like I've slowed everything down. So I thought that was really fantastic. Actually, I made a note here because I wanted to read this part. It was on page 147. Let me just find it.
It's good meditation. And everyone, you need to. See how Matt has two books. Everybody needs two of these books.
Everyone should have two of these books. For everyone, by the way, who doesn't know, this book is called It's Not You, Identifying and Healing from Narcissistic People. Is there a particular website you want people to go to, or just wherever they get their books?
Yeah, if you go to even if you go to my Instagram, in my bio, we have a link so you can sort of share the wealth, because there's lots of different places to get books, and you can go to my website, all those places, but even my Instagram bio would have that link to all the places.
What's
to
your
buy
exact
at Dr.
Instagram?
Romney.
At Dr. Ramani. So go over there now and grab a copy while you're listening to this. I have underlined so many parts of this book, it's ridiculous at this stage, because I just find there wasn't a page where I thought that's not important to me. But you said here, your higher order goals and aspirations like marriage, children, and career matter, but rushing into relationship or opportunity and missing unhealthy patterns can mean that those goals get distorted. And I thought that was a really interesting point. I almost would couple it with, there was another moment in the book, if I can refer to my notes, there was another moment where you talk about the things that predispose us to falling for the wrong patterns, or overlooking, in some cases, the wrong patterns early on. Outside of simply the trauma bond coming from a wound, it could be being in a difficult transition in your life, where you find yourself in a new city, or you just got let go from your job, or for whatever reason your defenses are down. That is a moment where someone like that can enter. Or you also talk about rushed relationships, and that made me think, because when I think about what creates rushed relationships outside of someone love bombing you and trying to speed you up, we ourselves can almost love bomb ourselves, because our higher order goals and aspirations like marriage, children, make us think this has to happen yesterday, especially for so many women who want children. So what is your advice for people trying to navigate the world of dating, who want healthy relationships, but the speed at which they're trying to go and their anxiety about not finding love in a certain period of time for their goals is predisposing them to overlook the wrong behavior?
Yeah, I mean, these are big, right? Because I'm going to tell you now, the vast majority of narcissistic relationships I have worked with, people, adult, like marriages and long-term committed relationships, was either the rush or the transition thing. In essence, they were far from home. They were in an unfamiliar place. They were coming out of something, or the pressure. The rush pressure often comes from the outside. All my friends are getting married. All my friends are having kids. That sort of thing, right? And that's like, if I don't lock this down, I don't have the patience to go back out there for 2 years, and it becomes the devil I know kind of thing. Like, at least I know all the weak points in this thing, right? So I can make this work. I know when the roof leaks. And I think that, again, I'm going to say that sometimes it's hard. It's hard to think of slowing down unless you start practicing slowing down, right? Imagine you're on a car ride in a gorgeous national park, but you're going 60 miles an hour, and like the most beautiful sights in the world are just whizzing by you. El Capitan, Half Dome, like the arches in Utah, like boom. You're like, wait, that was really nice. And you miss things, but you also miss. You're driving so quickly, you might miss, like, oh, that's a little bit dangerous, or oh, you're not supposed to go on that road, or whatever. When we go so fast, we miss the good and we miss the bad. Training ourselves to slow down can happen in ways, like you said, you take a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class, it forces you to slow down. It could be doing something like making an intricate recipe, where if you try to do it fast, you're going to end up wasting all that money on those ingredients, and the thing's going to burn, right? It could be clipping the nails on a cat. Let me tell you that you better go slow on, or you're going to look like somebody's like Jack the Ripper's coming to your house. So that takes a minute, right? So this can be applied to everything we do, is just slow down. However, you also have to ask yourself, what's happening around you that's making you rush? Because there's an internal sort of speeding up, right? And for some people, there's also an internal anxiety that if I don't lock this down, if I don't get this person to commit, if I don't get this to a place where it's going to feel more committed, like I got to make this relationship commit as soon as possible. There's an anxiety that even though it might actually move things in a way that's not comfortable, because many narcissistic people actually do like to rush relationships.